I used to think I understood fear. Not the battlefield kind, any soldier can feel that, but the deeper, older fear rooted in a species' collective memory. The fear that whispers when the unknown stares back, the kind that visits only once in a civilization's lifetime. I believed I knew it. I was wrong. That truth began the moment the briefing room lights dimmed and the holotable ignited. At first, we were relaxed, some even amused. Humans were a minor curiosity at best, a half-feral species from a dying blue world that had long ago destroyed its own biosphere. Their colonies were scattered, their fleets outdated, their politics fractured. A species more notable for their stubbornness than their technology. So, when intelligence announced that a single human fugitive, designated Subject K7, had infiltrated Dominion space, our squadron commander chuckled. "Huh," he scoffed, "send a shuttle." But the hollow image that flickered to life stole the humor from the air. 27 patrol ships floated in slow, weightless ruin, their hulls twisted into unnatural curves as though a colossal fist had grabbed and crushed them. Another set, 12 destroyers, drifted in fractured ribbons, not burned, not exploded, just broken, bent, as if some invisible force had wrapped around them and squeezed. A ripple of unease passed through the chamber. "Someone?" asked, disbelief thinning their voice. The intelligence officer nodded. Then, a murmur of confusion rose. 50 ships. Outer Rim detachments, yes, but still Dominion vessels, trained crews, hardened metal. That they had vanished was improbable. That they had been found like this was unthinkable. Then the audio logs played. Static, screaming, sensor alarms reporting gravity wells forming where none should exist, radiation spikes beyond our classification metrics, followed by a wet crackle of distortion. The room fell silent. Command insisted the fugitive carried stolen experimental technology. They said the collapse at Outpost Aegis 4 had given the human access to systems beyond his understanding, and that his escape was an act of reckless desperation. I remember thinking, even then, if this was desperation, what did intent look like? The Grand Marshal entered in full regalia, golden ocular implants glowing. His voice was low, heavy. "You will depart immediately," he ordered. "You will locate the human. Alive. Not eliminated, not neutralized." Several officers exchanged puzzled glances. Why preserve a being capable of tearing through 50 ships without returning fire? Why risk placing him aboard a Dominion vessel? The Marshal's jaw tightened. A pause, a careful, measured pause. And there it was. The reason none of us dared to voice. Our leaders were less concerned that a human had done this, and more afraid that he might not be the only one who could. The holo shifted to display the last known trajectory of the fugitive's vessel, an unremarkable shuttle fleeing into the dark expanse of Sector 9. A single, small dot fleeing into the abyss. Our admiral straightened. I remember the moment vividly. The confidence that pulsed through our ranks, the certainty that this mission was beneath the high expeditionary fleet. We were the spear of the Dominion. A lone human could not challenge us. But as the room emptied and the holo flickered with images of twisted metal and frozen silent hulls, I felt a chill coil along my spine. We launched believing we were hunters. We would soon learn we were prey. We emerged from warp expecting a battlefield. We expected debris, yes, but debris that made sense. Scorch marks, reactor bursts, hull plating torn by weapons fire. The familiar artistry of destruction that war paints across the void. But what greeted us at the disappearance site was not war. It was desecration. The first wreck drifted past our viewport in a slow, silent tumble. Its hull, once a proud obsidian crescent, had been twisted into a corkscrew, the metal stretched thin, as though some colossus had gripped the ends and twisted. Not ruptured, not blasted, bent. It defied everything we knew of engineering. You cannot bend neutron-forged plating. You can only break it, shatter it, melt it. Yet here, it spiraled like a child's ribbon toy. Another wreck floated nearby, its bulkhead peeled open in a perfect spiral seam. Not an explosion, not a breach, but an unwinding. The inner compartments spilled outward like the petals of an iron flower. No burn signatures, no plasma residue, no corpses, no lifeboats, just silence. Just the echo of a force that did not struggle, did not fight, simply reshaped. Our analysts scrambled to explain it. Not possible, one hissed. Another shook his head. We moved deeper into the graveyard of ships. The pattern grew worse. That was when we noticed the cores. Each vessel's power core chamber was open, cleanly. No signs of battle, no signs of detonation. The cores had been removed with surgical precision, the extraction ports untouched except for a fine dusting of crystallized coolant. Someone had boarded these ships. Someone had walked through the twisted corridors without leaving footprints. Someone had taken the most valuable component from every ship and left everything else intact. Not someone, the human. Fear slid through the crew like a cold draft. Not fear of an enemy's strength. No, we could understand strength, predict it, strategize against it. This was fear of intention. This wasn't combat, our science officer whispered. A strange tremor passed through me. The idea of a human calmly walking through the ruins of 50 Dominion ships, ours, our elites, felt wrong, obscene. But the evidence hung before us in the void. The Admiral ordered long-range bioscans. They swept the region, humming. For a moment, nothing. Then, a flicker. A life sign. Human. Isolated. Faint. Drifting in the shadows between two spiraled hull remnants. His shuttle looked old, civilian, unarmed, even damaged. But the moment we attempted to hail it, the comm units screeched with a harsh, metallic distortion, as if someone had reached into the signal itself and pulled it apart, strand by strand. Communications jammed, the comms officer reported, not externally. Impossible, the engineer snapped. Our systems are shielded, encrypted. The Admiral cut them off. Pursue. Lock on to that signature. Our engines flared. The fleet shifted formation. Dozens of warships glided into motion, cutting between the drifting carcasses of our comrades' vessels. Then, every alarm on the bridge erupted at once. Jump engines offline. Hyperflux conducts destabilized. Internal sabotage detected. Impossible. Impossible twice. And then, terrifyingly, no longer impossible at all. The engineer shouted, "No intruders!" How? We stared at each other, the truth sinking like a stone. The human did not flee from us. He waited for us. He brought us here, into this field of silent, twisted grave markers, herding us like prey. On the view screen, the human's shuttle drifted in the shadows, perfectly still, as if watching, as if deciding what to do with us next. We had been hunting shadows for hours, following flickers, phantom signatures, sensor ghosts that could not be trusted. But when the human shuttle finally appeared at the edge of our vanguard formation, the entire fleet exhaled as one. At last, something real. The Ascendant Blade, proud spearhead of our high expeditionary fleet, closed in immediately. Its commander, renowned for precision, arrogance, and a spotless kill record, broadcast the standard demand for surrender. The human responded. 3 seconds of audio. Warped, static-laced, spoken through a voice that sounded painfully, undeniably mortal. Turn back. The bridge crew blinked in disbelief. Then someone laughed. Another joined. Soon the entire deck erupted into mocking amusement. Warnings from prey?
Threats from one solitary human? The insult was too absurd to take seriously. Moments later, the laughter died. Moments later, everyone aboard the Ascendant Blade died. Our sensors captured everything. The human shuttle had been drifting, motionless, its engines cold. Then, without building charge, without spooling reactors, without any transitional acceleration, it moved. From zero to impossible. A blur, a streak, a violation of inertia itself. It struck the blade's forward shields at a shallow angle that should have vaporized the shuttle. Instead, the shields rippled like water. The shuttle passed through the barrier as though it weren't there. No resistance, no impact, no energy transfer we could detect. Our sensor chief stammered, "No answer, no theory, no precedent." We all watched in muted terror as the shuttle carved into the blade's hull. Bulkheads collapsed inward. Conduits ruptured. Electrical arcs danced through the warship's spine, cascading from bow to stern.
An instant later, the Ascendant Blade bloomed into a brilliant sphere of white fire, a silent, perfect supernova of disintegrating alloy. The shock wave rippled outward, wreckage shattered like glass, but the human shuttle? The human shuttle emerged through the explosion, intact, untouched, unscarred, as if the destruction around it simply refused to touch it. It drifted to a stop, stabilizing with a low hum, one that made every instrument on our bridge glitch with incomprehensible readings, gravity distortions, exotic radiation signatures, energy outputs that mapped like the shuttle was both powering up and powering down simultaneously. Our engineer stared in horror at their console. "This isn't a weapon," they whispered. This is something changing itself, reacting." Adaptation. The word spread like infection. Human adaptation. A survival trait at the biological level, now expressed through technology, or something technology could no longer fully explain. Something neither engineered nor controlled. Something symbiotic. The Admiral's hands trembled. Only once before had I seen him afraid, during the fall of Rethos Prime. But even then, he had faced the battlefield with dignity. Now, he stared at the single human shuttle like a man facing the extinction of everything he understood. Silence spread over the flag bridge, heavy and suffocating. Fear, real fear, settled into our bones. On the tactical display, the human shuttle slowly turned toward our fleet. It wasn't fleeing, it wasn't hiding, it was choosing its next target. The revelation shattered every assumption we had built our pursuit upon. For weeks, we had hunted Subject K7 under the classification reserved for war criminals, rogue saboteurs, deserters, bioweapons gone feral. Yet now, as fragments of sealed intelligence bled upward through the Dominion's bureaucratic strata, the truth assembled itself into a shape far more unsettling. Dr. Elias Kerr, human, civilian, theoretical physicist, had never belonged on any battlefield. He had been a quiet mind in a quiet lab, one of dozens of species-selected specialists assigned to the Aegis IV Singularity Research Array. Their mandate had been almost impossibly ambitious: develop a stable artificial microsingularity to power the next generation of FTL drives. Not a weapon, a revolution, a gift to the galaxy. But the Dominion had seen danger in possibility, threat in innovation, and chaos in human creativity. They had seeded the project with a silent fault, so small it was indistinguishable from coincidence, so precise it would trigger only under maximum load. Their intent was containment, sabotage without bloodshed, a political message, not a massacre. Instead, the containment lattice collapsed. The Aegis IV station imploded into a bloom of warped spacetime, shredding physics as easily as flesh. Thousands died in silence, their screams smothered by event horizon static.
At the epicenter of the catastrophe, in the chamber closest to the breach, stood Dr. Elias Kerr, shielding another researcher, his partner, Mia Wren. She was vaporized. Kerr should have followed her. Their biology divisions constructed pages of calculations demonstrating the impossibility of a human surviving that proximity. And yet he had. But he had not merely survived. Something had happened to him inside that collapsing singularity, something evolutionary or anomalous or violently transformative. The reports were inconsistent, as though the investigators themselves were afraid to commit certainty to text. Neural reconfiguration, energy sensitivity, gravitational intuition, a distortion around his physical form, apparently measurable even from a distance. None of us aboard the command flagship disagreed. We had seen what he could do. We had watched him reroute gravitational shear from our tractor nets as though redirecting a gust of wind. We had watched his shuttle, patched, scarred, an ugly thing cobbled from salvage, slip between the firing lanes of ships that could glass continents. Our gunnery team swore his vessel bent space in its wake, folding trajectories aside like cloth. Every attempt to corner him collapsed into embarrassment. Every trap we set, he dodged before it sprung. Every simulation predicting his capture failed before initialization completed. Command quietly added the directive that if elimination was possible, retrieval was no longer required. And yet, none of us who saw him up close believed destruction was his goal. At first, we dismissed these as misdirections, a fugitive's desperation, a damaged mind's babble. But his movements contradicted that assumption. Kerr avoided civilian lanes with almost obsessive precision. He sabotaged Dominion relays not to weaken us, but to block transmissions heading outward. He disabled tracking stations only when automated systems attempted to broadcast coordinates not of him, but of a location he seemed determined to isolate. He wasn't running, he was barricading. Aboard the flagship, unease settled over us like a pressure drop before a storm. The more we analyzed him, the more the pattern curved toward a single disquieting truth. Elias Kerr believed he was containing something from Aegis 4's collapse, something that had changed him, and perhaps not only him. Our intelligence chief, a rigorous and humorless Threxan named Vorshell, compiled a dossier summarizing the psychological probability models. No one laughed. The Dominion High Command ignored this interpretation, of course. The Dominion trusted only in power and categories. To them, Kerr was an aberration, an accident that contradicted their narrative of human frailty. He had to be eliminated, not because he was dangerous, but because the idea of him was dangerous. Humans were supposed to be unpredictable, resilient, tenacious. But they were not supposed to reach into the domain of singularities and come back with gravity clinging to their bones like a second shadow. Kerr broke the shape of their expectations, and systems fear what breaks their structure. Our orders remained unchanged: intercept, contain, neutralize. But each time his shuttle vapor-traced past our sensors, weaving through kill zones with surgical precision, more of us started to see the pattern behind his evasions. He never attacked first. He only returned fire when his escape route was blocked. And even then, his gravitational pulses targeted weapons, sensors, engines, never crews. A weaponized man who refused to kill. Even as he fought us. Even as we boxed him in again and again. Even as he threw himself against the Dominion's tightening net like a cornered star beast. One moment in particular seared itself into my memory. When our 9th Interdiction Fleet pinned him above the shattered moon of Lornus III, we thought we had him. 26 ships formed a perfect gravitational envelope. We watched his shuttle tumble into a descending spin, hull buckling under stress. And then he spoke. A direct transmission, clear, unbroken. Turn back, please. It was not a threat. It was a plea. And not a plea for his life, but for ours. Moments later, the moon's corpse shuddered with a rippling distortion, space flexing, shrinking, trembling like a creature trying to breathe through a closed throat. Our sensors overloaded, our formation shattered. When the distortion faded, Kerr was gone. He left no taunt, no message, no victory. Only the growing realization that the Dominion had miscategorized the most important variable. Elias Kerr wasn't the danger. He was the warning. We had him. For the first time in the entire pursuit, those words carried weight. Not hope, not speculation, certainty. The High Expeditionary Fleet, 50 Dominion warships drawn from across 3 sectors, executed the maneuver that existed in doctrine only as a theoretical exercise, a full encirclement. A perfect sphere of overlapping firing arcs. No vectors of escape, no blind angles, no gravitational inconsistencies. 50 ships, each capable of leveling a city. 50 reactors humming in perfect synchronization. 50 fire control matrices trained upon a single shuttle, suspended in silence at the center of our convergence like a mote caught in the eye of a storm. Subject K7, Dr. Elias Kerr, the anomaly, the paradox, the man who bent gravity like a sculptor bends clay. Even he could not survive this. That was the belief whispered across the command decks. That was the relief building in our chests. After weeks of pursuit, dozens of failed intercepts, and the quiet, growing dread seeded by his warnings, we were finally in control. Around me, the bridge crew prepared the primary barrage. Plasma lances warmed like dragon hearts, their containment fields shimmering with electric haze. Tactical overlays drew predictive kill patterns across the shuttle's silhouette. Every simulation predicted the same outcome: destruction. It would take less than a second. Our admiral's voice carried the solemn finality of a sentence being passed. We waited for the firing code. Then, before the order could be spoken, his voice came through. A whisper, impossibly calm. There was no time to process the words, no time to react. The universe simply folded. A soundless detonation of force rippled outward, centered on the shuttle. Not an explosion, more like space-time itself exhaled. Our sensors spiked into unreadable extremes. Pressure blossomed in my skull like invisible hands pushing inward. Gravity, our gravity, lurched, then inverted. We were flung backward, not pushed, not repelled, inverted, as though the ship's mass had suddenly become allergic to the center point of the formation. Dozens of vessels hurtled outward in spirals and tumbles, their trajectories curling like leaves in a typhoon. I was weightless, then crushed, then weightless again. Hull plates screamed under the strain. Neutron-forged metal, engineered to endure the pressures of collapsing stars, wrinkled like soft foil. Bulkheads creaked, beams warped, deck plating buckled beneath our feet. One of the cruisers, the Varen's Edge, folded inward mid-flight, imploding like a dying star as its internal gravity short-circuited. Another, the Solvit Prime, tore apart along its midline, its artificial gravity well turning against itself and ripping its spine in half. Across the tactical display, red blossoms bloomed one after another as our formation disintegrated. But the strangest detail, what haunts me still, was the silence. No weapons fire, no counterattack, no triumphant broadcast, only the soft hum of distortion as Kerr moved. His shuttle drifted forward through the chaos, not with the frenetic lurch of evasive maneuvers, but with steadiness, deliberate, intentional, almost gentle. Gravity rippled from it in controlled pulses, each one perfectly sculpted. A destroyer spiraled toward him on a collision vector. With a flicker of distortion, he nudged to the side, altering its momentum just enough that it drifted harmlessly past. The Res Tal, engines aflame, tumbled directly toward him. He reached out, not physically, but gravitationally, neutralizing its spin and stabilizing its descent long enough for its crew to regain control. He was fighting us, but he was saving us at the same time. "Sir," one of the gunnery officers choked out, clutching her console as our ship lurched sideways. The Admiral couldn't answer. None of us could. Through the storm of buckling ships and collapsing gravity wells, Kerr danced with inhuman precision. He targeted emitters, not reactors, weapons ports, not bridge modules, engine nacelles, not life support cores. His restraint was terrifying.
Even as we fired blindly through the chaos, some out of fear, some out of training, some out of pure accident, he avoided every lethal zone with motions that felt less like piloting and more like a man navigating the path of inevitability. It was artistry, terrible, awe-inspiring artistry. And it lasted only minutes. 7 minutes. 7 minutes in which 50 warships, the pride of the Dominion, were reduced to drifting, crippled wreckage. Not destroyed, not burnt-out hulks, but neutralized, silenced, made impotent without taking a single life. When the final pulse of gravitational backlash subsided, the fleet hung in space like debris caught in amber. Broken hulls floated without propulsion. Engines sputtered. Weapon systems lay dark and unresponsive. Every bridge crew, ours included, sat in stunned silence, breathing through pain and disbelief. We had been defeated, decisively, effortlessly, mercifully. At the center of the carnage, Kerr's shuttle drifted to a halt. The distortion field around it flickered like a dying ember. Lights inside the craft dimmed. The engines wound down with a long, exhausted whine. Our sensors showed the impossible. He was nearly spent. The gravitational storm he had unleashed, whatever it was, had pushed his altered physiology to the brink. Energy signatures collapsed inward. Neural readings flattened. His shuttle powered down. He had won. And he had spared us. The Admiral sank into his chair, legs trembling beneath him. His hands, always perfectly steady, shook as he removed his command visor. What? Someone whispered. A question with no answer. But then another officer, young, inexperienced, trembling, voiced the thought that had been growing in all our minds ever since his first warning. If he didn't want to kill us, her voice cracked. Silence again. But this silence felt different. He hadn't won for his sake. He hadn't spared us out of compassion or hesitation or moral rigidity. He had spared us because killing us would not solve the real problem. Because our pursuit wasn't a chase, it was a containment breach. Our mission was never to capture him. Our leaders weren't afraid of what he was capable of doing to them. They were afraid of what he was holding back. As our crippled fleet drifted, engines ruined, weapons cold, and pride shattered, one truth settled over us with the weight of a collapsing star. Elias Kerr feared something else. Something large enough to make 50 warships irrelevant. Something powerful enough that gravity-twisting abilities, ship-crushing force, and superhuman resilience were merely side effects of his proximity to it. Something born on Aegis IV. Something that had not remained behind. And as we stared at the dimming shuttle at the center of our ruined fleet, another thought burrowed its way into our collective consciousness, sharp and unwelcome. What if the containment had already failed? And what if the only thing still standing between us and that failure was the dying man inside that shuttle? We drifted among the remnants of 50 ships, floating like shattered bones in the dark. Silence had settled, heavy and unnatural. Then the sensors screamed. Not a warp flare, not a jump anomaly. Something else. Something alive. The system's edge tore open before our eyes, as if space-time itself had been clawed by invisible fingers. A rift blossomed, jagged, luminous, and hungry. Hull plates quivered on even the most massive vessels. Readings cascaded into the red, then into unreadable chaos. Then the human's voice cut through, distorted by static, but raw with terror. Get your fleet out of here! We had never heard fear in a human before, not from Kerr, not even in battle. But this was different.
This was pure recognition of annihilation. Then it came. Emerging from the rift, it was impossible to categorize. A shadow coiled around gravity, wrapped in plasma, its edges fraying into jagged distortions that danced like living lightning. It moved with a hunger that bent light and matter to its will. Our instruments screamed readings that no entity should ever produce. Energy density beyond a star, gravitational curvature without mass, electromagnetic radiation that tore through shields and scrambled communications. It was a predator, a singularity given form, a conscious anomaly evolved from the same experiment that had transformed Dr. Kerr. It did not chase, it hunted, it consumed. And it feasted on energy signatures, the heartbeats of our 50 crippled vessels. 3 of our ships vanished in bursts of collapsing light. Nothing remained but twisted fragments and a scream of radiation across the sensor grid. Others followed, torn apart by forces our weapons could not touch. Plasma lances melted mid-flight, gravity wells reversed violently, and shields collapsed without a trace. Kerr acted. His shuttle flared with impossible energy, engines burning at levels that should have obliterated them. Gravity waves erupted outward, striking the creature with forces strong enough to fracture moons. The entity recoiled only momentarily, before turning, its hunger undiminished. Each wave he sent was absorbed, converted, and fed back into its movement. "Kerr," he shouted, voice raw, "this is my fault, my burden." Our hyperdrives remained dead, jump engines offline, every vessel trapped within the curvature of this emerging nightmare. There was no escape. No maneuver would outrun it. No tactic could oppose it. We were prey, and the human between us and oblivion was its target. Kerr collided with the creature's energy tendrils, sending ripples through space that twisted metal, cracked hulls, and flattened sensor arrays. He moved faster than anything we could track. He redirected gravitational currents to crush or push, yet never targeted crew compartments. Every strike, every manipulation was a precise surgical effort to slow, to contain, not to kill. The creature adapted with terrifying intelligence. Each pulse from Kerr, each gravitational strike was countered with a response that distorted our reality. A ship that had survived impact was drawn apart without warning. Sensors failed mid-scan. Time itself seemed to bend as the anomaly shifted through dimensions just beyond our perception. And then we understood. Kerr had not simply survived the Aegis IV collapse, he had escaped it. The singularity that had reshaped his neural pathways, his physiology, his perception of energy, it had left a shadow behind. A predator grown from the same impossible conditions that had made him what he was. A predator that now sought to finish what physics had started. We watched, paralyzed, as he intercepted the creature again and again. His shuttle emitted waves that ripped at space-time, hurling massive debris and even crippled ships toward it. The predator adapted in milliseconds, digesting each assault like a living engine. Every maneuver Kerr made drained him further, yet he held his ground. His voice trembled across the channels, but never in surrender. "Go! Leave!" Some of the fleet obeyed instinctively, attempting escape trajectories. Even crippled, we tried to limp toward the edges of the system. Hyperdrives refused, jump conduits overloaded. Even mass driver-assisted maneuvers failed. There was no fleeing the rift, no outpacing the anomaly. And through it all, Kerr remained between us and annihilation. His body, mind, and shuttle fused with the impossible physics we barely understood. Sensors reported neural firing patterns that defied neurobiology, energy readings from his hull that suggested partial singularity containment, and gravitational distortions that contradicted known law. He was exhaustion and perfection, terror and control, adaptation made tangible. Our communications officers muttered broken phrases, It shouldn't exist. No species survives. We are nothing. Their voices lost amid the rift's hum. Engineers wept quietly as console readings jumped from numerical errors to nonsensical symbols. Some stared blankly at the screens, incapable of processing the scope of the threat. Kerr hurled himself directly into the creature's tendrils, his shuttle pulsating with a final, radiant burst of energy. The predator recoiled, shrieking across the electromagnetic spectrum. We could see its form pulse, almost sentient, reacting, calculating, feeding, but slowed, delayed, forced to consume in micro-intervals. The human sacrifice gave us space, breathing room, just enough to attempt what our technology could not otherwise achieve. And then he vanished. Not destroyed, not fleeing, vanished. Sensors could no longer locate him. Only residual gravitational anomalies, faint energy traces, and the memory of what had been. The entity's hunger remained, but it had shifted its focus. The predator had found the scar where Kerr had been, an echo, a signature, a bait, and our crippled fleet hung in the balance, teetering between annihilation and survival. For the first time, we recognized the scale of what we faced. This was not a fugitive human. This was not a rogue experiment. This was a predator born of human ingenuity, altered physics, and dominion malfeasance. The only thing that had delayed it was the human we had called a target. And the stark, unthinkable truth descended upon us. Kerr had not been running. He had been protecting. He had not merely survived. He had carried a burden none of our fleets could bear. And now the predator had found him again. We had glimpsed the truth of human resilience, and in that revelation we felt a fear far older than war. Not fear of death, not fear of defeat, fear of inevitability. The rift expanded, clawing at the edges of reality. The predator advanced. 3 more ships, already crippled, already defenseless, erupted in collapsing light. Our fleet shuddered in unison, engines failing, gravity wells twisting, shields groaning, weapon systems screaming, the collective heartbeat of the Dominion quivering in the void. And then silence. We knew, in that instant, that the hunt had ended. The real battle, the one none of us were trained for, was only beginning. The entity moved closer. And in the void of broken ships, shattered pride, and the human who had become both savior and weapon, we realized nothing we had known could prepare us for what was coming next. The rift's edge shimmered like molten glass. The predator's shadow stretched. And the high expeditionary fleet, 50 ships reduced to drift and ruin, was staring down the consequences of its own arrogance. There would be no second chance. Only survival, if it was even possible. The rift pulsed at the system's edge, a living wound in space-time. The predator had not slowed. Its shadow stretched across our remaining vessels, twisting gravity and devouring energy signatures with methodical hunger. Even crippled, the fleet trembled under its approach. Then, Kerr's voice came across every channel simultaneously, weak, strained, but commanding. It carried a human authority we had never heard in the years of Dominion command. It made us stop, even amidst terror. "I'm sorry," he said. His face appeared on comm displays, bloodied, eyes aflame with exhaustion and resolve that sent shivers through even the oldest officers. There was no bravado, no taunt, only responsibility. The weight of an entire fleet's survival rested on the shoulders of one man, one human. We watched, powerless, as he prepared what could only be called a final maneuver. The shuttle's hull shimmered with energy, internal systems straining beyond engineering limits. Gravity wells bent in impossible curves. The singularity physics Kerr had carried within himself, the mutations of mind and body, the knowledge of collapse and reconstruction, radiated outward like a beacon of defiance.
Then it began. He initiated a controlled singularity event within the shuttle. Energy spiraled, gravity twisted, space-time itself buckled. An inverted pocket of reality opened. A trap, a tomb, a cage, all in one. The predator surged toward it, drawn to the energy, sensing instinctively what Kerr had wrought. For a moment, the impossible held. The creature, titanic, chaotic, hunger incarnate, was caught. Distorted light shimmered across the field, time dilated inside the trap, gravity inverted and held in a perfect balance. The fleet, our ruined flagship included, watched through sensors, unable to comprehend what physics had just become. But nothing born from a human's ingenuity was simple. The creature resisted. Tendrils of singularity snapped and stretched against containment. The pocket wavered. Reality shivered. Energy readings surged past limits. Kerr's body convulsed with feedback from the field. The energy was tearing at him as much as it held the predator. Neural readings went off the charts. His altered physiology struggled to keep coherence. Screams, barely human, broke through comm channels. Pain radiated from the shuttle like a gravitational pulse. Yet Kerr's hands, his mind, his will, impossibly, almost supernaturally, remained focused. Each flick of his controls, each adjustment to the field, was precise. He was the anchor. He was the wall. He gasped, blood streaking the comm lens across his face. His voice broke, but determination did not. And then, from the flagship, a desperate initiative. Our remaining power cells, the last reserves in all of Dominion space within reach, were synchronized, directed into the anomaly. A chain reaction of controlled energy fed into the pocket, stabilizing the collapsing singularity just long enough to keep it from unraveling entirely. The predator shrieked across the spectrum, a soundless scream that stretched the limits of sensor comprehension. Reality buckled under its struggle, but the containment held. The creature twisted, reached, fought, but the human and the fleet had acted in concert. One biological anomaly against one other, the rest of us mere instruments. Then silence. The pocket dimension sealed, a snap of space-time, a folding of reality, and the predator gone, devoured by the cage it could not escape. Its shadow, its hunger, its impossible presence vanished. Kerr's shuttle drifted silently, hull cracked and systems inert, a fragile vessel against the void. His body sagged, barely conscious, but alive. Sensors confirmed vitals. Heart still beating, neural activity faint but present. He had survived what no human, no species should have survived. We boarded him, extracted him from the drifting wreck of his shuttle. Bloodied, broken, trembling, but breathing. One by one, the fleet's remaining crew approached. The human, the anomaly, the savior, lay in their arms, and yet remained more than any one species could define. You don't understand. Barely audible, a rasp that carried the weight of universes. You don't understand. His eyes, faintly glowing from the energy imprint within him, met the nearest officer's gaze. Humans don't run from monsters. Then unconsciousness claimed him. The fleet exhaled, though none of us felt relief. Too much had been seen. Too much had been understood. Dominion pride, discipline, and doctrine all shattered. 50 ships lay in ruin, and yet one human had survived, outwitted, outmoved, and outlasted forces beyond comprehension. No one spoke for long minutes. Even the Threxan officers, their exoskeletons trembling, stared at the faint outline of the sealed pocket where reality had warped and folded. The rift had vanished. Space had healed, or at least pretended to, but we all knew that nothing would ever feel the same again. The human's last act had been both salvation and indictment. He had saved us from annihilation. He had also reminded us of our limitations, of our arrogance, of the fragility of structure when faced with the unpredictable ingenuity of a species we had long dismissed. In the aftermath, as engineers whispered over twisted consoles and officers surveyed the dead and crippled ships, one realization took hold. We had glimpsed something fundamentally alien in human nature. Not alien in biology, but alien in essence. Adaptation, resolve, unshakable courage, the capacity to take the impossible, stare into the void, and say, "I will be the wall." The flagship crew, shaken but alive, began recovery operations. Vessels were stabilized, damage assessed, casualties counted. Yet no one could stop thinking of the human. Bloodied, exhausted, and barely alive, yet still the singular point that had altered the fate of an entire fleet. Command issued orders to retrieve the shuttle wreckage, but even as we obeyed, none of us dared voice the truth that had settled on every mind. Kerr had not only survived, he had transcended, and we had witnessed it. Not as soldiers against a human fugitive, not as Dominion enforcers executing protocol, not as a fleet hunting what we assumed was prey, but as witnesses to a species' singular capacity to endure, to adapt, and to stop monsters that should have devoured entire star systems. Humans do not run, they become the wall, and that wall, frail, improbable, terrifying, had just saved the Dominion fleet. In the silent drift among wreckage, as the last rifts of distorted space collapsed and sensors stabilized, a single thought echoed across the flagship's bridge. We had fought and we had been spared. By a human. By a being we barely understood. By the impossible. And even as unconsciousness claimed him, even as the fleet struggled to resume movement, even as the void reclaimed its rules, one certainty remained. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. Not as prey, not as curiosity, not as primitive survivors, but as the living wall between order and annihilation. We had seen it. And we would never forget. The fleet limped home, a shadow of its former might. 50 ships had entered the pursuit of one human. 50 ships had been shattered, twisted, and left adrift in the void. We carried survivors, yes, but we also carried the weight of the impossible. Dominion records would never reflect what we had witnessed. Reports would claim swift victory, that the rogue human threat had been neutralized, that protocol had been enforced, doctrine upheld, and the fleet's honor preserved. Officially, the expedition was a success. We knew better. We had sent 50 ships to capture one human. We lost them all. Not because he was a monster, not because he had sought vengeance, not because he had any intent to dominate. We had lost them because he had done exactly what he said he would. Protect, preserve, contain what even he feared. Contain the predator born from forces that should have killed him. Forces that could annihilate entire star systems. Dr. Elias Kerr, our human anomaly, remained unconscious in a sealed medical chamber. His body, altered by exposure to singularities, by energies no species should endure, flickered with readings that terrified the medics. Some whispered fear. What might he become? What could a human subjected to impossible physics evolve into? Others whispered admiration, reverence, shock that any species could carry the weight of such responsibility and survive. Every surviving officer, every engineer and bridge crew member understood one immutable truth. Humans are not what the galaxy believes them to be. Not fragile, not primitive, not weak. Humans are the species that crawls out of extinction events, the species that endures disasters that topple civilizations, the species that adapts, mutates, and emerges stronger from forces that would render others extinct, the species that steps into the void and does not retreat. We had faced destruction, annihilation, and chaos on a scale our fleet had never trained to endure, and yet it was the human, not any of our technology, not our tactical genius, not even our numbers, who had turned the tide,
who had prevented the predator from consuming us all, who had been the wall between the Dominion fleet and extinction. We had witnessed a species that refused to run from monsters, a species that becomes the wall. Our pride, so often unshakable, so rigidly disciplined, had been shattered. And yet, within that shattered pride, something new had taken root: understanding, respect, fear. Fear not born from hostility, fear born from awe, fear born from the knowledge that humans do not merely survive. They endure, they adapt, they protect. They shape reality to their will, not for conquest, but for survival, and for the preservation of what they deem worth saving. The fleet's journey back was quiet. Every bridge crew member, engineer, and officer wrestled with what we had seen.
Some stared out into the blackness, seeing not stars, but reminders of our failure to comprehend human potential. Others worked in silence, repairing what they could, knowing the repairs could never truly mend the fleet's shaken certainty. Medical teams monitored Kerr, noting every heartbeat, every neural spike, every abnormal energy signature. We watched, collectively holding our breath. He should have died multiple times, and yet he had survived. More than survived, he had triumphed. And in that triumph lay a warning: humans are not to be underestimated. They are not merely survivors of their homeworld's harshness. They are species capable of shaping reality to defend what they care for. They are the species that stands between annihilation and life. We returned to Dominion space, bearing scars, stories, and a secret understanding. The official narrative would praise our fleet. They would declare success. But among the survivors, there was a silent covenant. We had seen the truth, and we would not forget it. Humans are not what the galaxy believes them to be. We had once feared what they might do when provoked: their anger, their recklessness, their stubborn survival instinct. Now, after seeing what one human could do while protecting us, while containing a force we could not hope to comprehend, we feared something far greater. We feared what humans might do when they decide to defend. We feared what they might become when they stand as the wall between life and annihilation. And we knew, deep in the marrow of our collective fleet, that the universe would never be the same again. For 50 ships had fallen, for countless lives, for centuries of arrogance, for the pride of the Dominion itself. Our lesson had been taught. Humans are not to be trifled with. Humans are the impossible made real. Humans are the species that becomes the wall. And from now on, we would carry that fear, a quiet, unshakable fear, because we had witnessed it firsthand, because we had survived it, because for the first time in Dominion history, the galaxy had learned that some walls are absolute, and humans are those walls. And as the flagship limped through familiar space, carrying battle-worn crews and a single human hero whose heart still beat against impossible odds, we understood the final truth. No report, no proclamation, no record could ever capture it. Only those who saw it, endured it, and survived it would carry the memory. We had seen it, and we feared it. For all of space and for all of history to come, humans were no longer prey, no longer curiosity, no longer fragile. Humans were the wall, and the universe had better recognize it.